It's good to be with you talking about weather and climate issues as we draw to the end of a summer that I guess I would say not many people expected to be quite the way it is. We have a variety of interesting things to talk about today. One of these are showing you is in front of you a picture from Colorado recently with a winter wheat field showing how poor the winter wheat field is because of ongoing drought issues. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's an interesting contrast to some of the issues that we are seeing in other parts of the Great Plains and Corn Belt. So just a reminder of who is involved here. This is, again, a cooperative venture among NOAA, Weather Service, State Climatologist, Regional Climate Centers, the Climate Prediction Center, Iowa State, and the National Drought Mitigation Center, everybody contributing a piece of this in good cooperative fashion. It could be a good avenue to show other people within the federal government how cooperation can work. Just a reminder, our next climate and drought updates will be September 19th. Jim Angel, who is also on the call today, our Illinois State Climatologist, will be giving the briefing in coordination with Brad Rippey from USDA, I believe Office of the Chief Economist, since we will be in the very close to harvest season talking about harvest conditions, crop issues, that sort of thing, hooking up to this. Just a reminder of where to sign up for these, the webinars, and these obviously will be recorded, the slideshow and the recording will be available for review later or to pass on to other people. And then at the end, we will be doing questions at the end. So hold on to them, think of some good ones, and we'll take care of them at that point. Just kind of a quick agenda, put some historical context on where we are right now, current conditions, some of the impacts issues, ag and water related, and take a look at the outlook. I showed you at the start a picture from Colorado from some of the impacts of droughts in our area. This is a picture from the National Weather Service office in Springfield, Roaring River State Park in Missouri, where a camping trip didn't look like a good ending here with some of the flooding that we've had going on the last couple weeks here. I couldn't resist putting this picture in with the classic sign right in the middle that the road is impassable during high water, under redundancy redundant. So obviously a huge amount of water in some areas that still had some drought issues going on. We'll talk about that as we go along here. Recapping where we have been for the month of July, statewide rankings for temperature. On the right-hand side, you can see July of 2013. We have had a very classic ridge-trough ridge pattern over the U.S. A ridge over the western U.S. You can see temperatures for July out there in the much above normal category, many more fire issues out in that area. In the middle part of the country, a trough pattern with very cool air over most of the Midwest and down into the southeast, with Iowa, Illinois being 11th coldest on record down into the southeast, where they've had top 10 coldest Julys on record, and then warm conditions with a ridge over the eastern U.S. So quite a classic pattern with a lot of Canadian air coming down. Very cool conditions overall, especially in the central plains, Corn Belt, and down to the southeast. This is in sharp contrast to what we had last year, where we had in July very warm conditions, near record warmth all across the middle part of the country. Interestingly, in contrast, we're looking at precipitation for the month of July. You see some interesting contrasts as we look across the central part of the U.S., where part of that Canadian air did lead to some drier conditions in places, but also some wetter conditions in certain places, and not too far apart from each other. You see Iowa and Wisconsin being 10th and 12th driest on record for the month of July. Minnesota and Nebraska being 27th and 30th, but then South Dakota being 81st on the wet side comparatively, and then Illinois and Missouri down in Arkansas coming in middle of the road. Kansas coming in at 97th, Colorado 95th. And remember that July, especially in some of these states, is not that wet a month, so to be on the wet side is not necessarily incredibly wet, but interesting contrasts which have combined with the cool temperatures have had some interesting impacts across the region. And again, a reminder of last year where we had very, very dry conditions after the middle part of the country. We look at the most recent 30 days. Those previous ones were for the calendar month of July. Most recent 30 days, upper left-hand side, total precipitation across the region. Montana on the upper left-hand side, Iowa here, Indiana in the lower right-hand side. You can see where the overall precipitation, central Kansas down to southeastern Missouri on the wetter side with total amounts on the order of 12, 14 plus inches of precipitation. In contrast, you go to northern Missouri or western Iowa, you see over the last 30 days in parts of western Iowa having had less than an inch of precipitation. Western Iowa is a very strong, a very large corn growing area. It's interesting, the real contrast you've seen. That dry area of western Iowa was one of the wetter areas this spring. So we went from very wet to very dry in a very short period of time. Lower right-hand side shows percent of normal precipitation for the same 30 days. Putting some historical context on it, that area of Kansas into Missouri on the order of 200% to 300% of average precipitation over the last 30 days. Also some wetter areas in the western Dakotas, up into Montana, parts of Wyoming, and then over in the east, Ohio, and parts of Michigan. But you can see over much of Iowa and northern Missouri, and not far away from those heavy rain areas, we had some very dry areas, less than 50% of average precipitation, many places less than 25% of average. That even extends over in Illinois, parts of Indiana, and on into Wisconsin. The big difference between this year and last year in the way of some of these dry conditions were the temperatures. While we had very warm conditions last year, much cooler conditions this year. The heavy precipitation, here we got the 7-day average stream flow conditions from USGS indicating, again, the contrast in stream flows across the region. The heavy rain areas obviously leading to very high to near record stream flows across Kansas, Missouri, on down to Oklahoma and Arkansas. Even Kevin Lau provided that I believe the Gasconade River in Missouri set an all-time record flow in part of the basin. Also, wetter areas in parts of western South Dakota, parts of North Dakota, and then in the far eastern part of the Corn Belt. But in the middle part of the Corn Belt, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, again, lower than average, below average stream flows. Also some quite below average stream flows up in Wyoming and Montana. Also, Kevin Lau also provided that they are issuing some forecasts there because there's some local concern because of lower stream flows on parts, the very upper parts of the Missouri River and parts of the Yellowstone River because of very low stream flows up in that area. Okay, most recent 30 days temperatures. Upper left-hand side, the average temperatures for the last 30 days ranging from averages in the upper 70s to lower 80s across the southern part of the region up to the mid-60s in the northern part of the region. You compare that to average and you see a very strong signal, which we've been talking about already, much cooler than average temperatures from the Dakotas down to Missouri, all across the Corn Belt except for parts of Wisconsin and Michigan, ranging from 2 to 3 degrees, some places as much as 4 and 5 degrees below average for the last 30 days. So much more pleasant conditions for the middle of summer, but it's also bringing some interesting issues along with it we'll talk about here in just a second. Areas of Montana and Colorado have been running above average, more underneath the ridge than we are in the trough area part of the Midwest. Okay, this precipitation temperature combination issue is very interesting. The cooler temperatures have provided some beneficial issues because a critical time for corn yield is the tasseling time, and when you introduce stress on a crop at that point, you reduce yield. Because we've had cooler temperatures, the places that were dry, we've reduced the amount of stress, therefore we've allowed for the corn to maintain some yield. Basically, cooler temperatures reduce the crop water use, so if you have dry soils and you could be potentially stressing corn, the cooler temperatures help to provide that benefit. So it's balanced out some of the dry areas by reducing some of the stress. Even though we had the very wet or the very dry areas showing up recently in parts of Iowa and Missouri, We are seeing some stress setting on. It could have been much worse if we'd had several 90, 95-degree days or even some 100-degree days like we did last year. Now, on the off side, what we're seeing with these cooler temperatures is a slow accumulation of growing degree days. Basically, growing degree days are a temperature index using temperature data to estimate an amount of heat accumulated by a crop. Basically, it's the daily average temperature minus 50. There's a couple caveats that are thrown in there. This is watched very closely to determine when, how much longer your crop is going to have to go to reach harvest, and will it make it to maturity by the time the freeze comes. So the double accumulation we've had this year is crops have been delayed in development because of the very cool temperatures recently. Doubling to that was that we had a cool, wet spring that delayed planting. So not only did we get crops in late, they've not experienced enough heat along the way. So that is becoming a big issue and a big concern across the Corn Belt. Also, I've heard some reduced disease issues because of the combination of drier conditions and cooler temperatures. Some disease issues have not arisen in crops. Looking a little more at the growing degree day accumulation, this is a plot from the Weekly Weather and Crop Bulletin. Note that this goes from April 1 till August 10. So this is the number of degree days accumulated during this time. And you can see the bands that line up pretty well with the latitude bands, with warmer temperatures to the north, with warmer temperatures to the south, cooler temperatures to the north. But if we could put a departure from normal, departure from average on that, you can see the areas that are more critical. Areas from the Dakotas down to down all the way through the middle part of the Corn Belt, Kansas, in Illinois, Arkansas, up to 100 degree days below average, and parts of Missouri, northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota were over 100 degree days behind average. That would be the heat accumulation is ranging from maybe a week to 10 days or maybe 2 weeks in some cases behind average at this point. That would not be a huge issue except for the fact that, April 1st, a lot of crops did not go in April 1st. They didn't even go in May 1st. Many places didn't get crops in until later May or early June. So with the late planting, they need the heat, and with the lack of heat, there is very much concern about how soon we'll reach maturity. So, GDDs, just reiterating, accumulation indicates slowed growth. We're 1 to 2 weeks behind development from May 1st, and that would depend on when you got your crop in your areas. I did some talks in Iowa where they were still putting some soybeans in about the 3rd week of June, and there's been replant issues. So for people who got things in an early condition are probably okay. People with later planted crops are likely going to have larger issues. And we're seeing that in some of the crop progress conditions. This is a chart that comes from also the Weekly Weather and Crop Bulletin, very clearly indicating what is shown here is the percent silking, how much has reached that tasseling or reproductive stage. These are all the main Corn Belt states. Last year at this time, obviously, we were further ahead. The previous week is in the 2nd column. The 3rd week is where we were at this last one, and then the 5-year average. So pointing out 2 places where Iowa, we have 85% of corn has reached silking compared to the 95% average. When you are in the middle of August and you still are 15% of corn not tasseling in Iowa, that is amazingly late. You also see something similar down in Wisconsin where 78% is tasseled or 22% is not tasseled. So there you have a lot of corn that's probably going to struggle and likely not going to reach maturity by the time the freeze comes. So there will be some yield loss issues because of that. Here you can see in a graphic format. This is also from USDA, the World Agricultural Outlook Board. Brad Rippey provided this. This is the percent of crop that has reached dough stage, another stage in the crop development, the next one after the reproductive one. The top number is percent of crops in that state that have reached that, and the bottom number in each state is how far behind percentage-wise you are. And you can see Minnesota 20% behind, Iowa 30% behind, Nebraska 22%. So only places that are close to average are in the eastern Corn Belt, Ohio a little bit, and then Pennsylvania is ahead, but Pennsylvania is not a major corn growing state. So another indicator of slowed crop development. One of the other pieces of information that we use then for is can the crop reach accumulation? Can it reach maturity by the time it reaches freeze? This is a tool, this is a screenshot of a tool, not the live tool, developed by a project some of us are involved with, the Useful to Usable project, the USDA-sponsored project through Purdue University. 5 state climatologists are involved with this, but trying to assess the degree days and use it for corn. And I show an example here. What is shown here is the months across the bottom, and then the blue line in the middle is the average growing degree day accumulation starting May 1, assuming you planted May 1 this year. The green line compares degree day accumulation for this year compared to the 30-year average. So it shows again how starting May 1, we've been running behind degree day accumulation since that time. The red line on top is the accumulation last year, so you can see how much faster accumulation we had. Now, the vertical line, the blue vertical line in the middle is that tasseling. When would we reach tasseling? And then the red line on the right-hand side is the black layer, basically physiological maturity. And we're looking at that compared to the blue line, which is the median freeze date. So looking at when is that maturity going to occur compared to the median freeze date. And what we're showing you here is this. I took this from Cerro Gordo County, northern Iowa, assuming someone got something planted May 1 and planted a 103-day variety, which is probably not too long a variety for that location. People probably try to plant more, plant a longer-term variety. In this case, May 1 might be a little optimistic. They probably didn't get it until later. So what this is showing you is that if we have average accumulation from this point on, we're still going to have reaching physiological maturity about at the average freeze date. So it's going to be very close in this situation. That's one of the ways we can use this tool. We've been trying to track and assess how much of the crop is going to be at risk or what kind of problems we're going to have with physiological maturity. Okay, just looking at some of the other maps here, corn areas in droughts. Much different from last year, but we've had some resurgence of droughts in western Iowa, parts of Missouri, Nebraska, in the Corn Belt. So we have some corn under stress again. The soybean area is similar in the way of coverage area. This is also showing up in the corn and soybean conditions. Same earlier as we showed for corn. This is the percent or corn condition by percent for various states: very poor, poor, fair, good, and excellent. And the soybean on the right-hand side, and showing some of the problem areas that we have. Here, Colorado has a lot of corn and poor to very poor, but they're not as major produced corning area. But you can see Iowa, 5% very poor, 12% poor. So crop conditions problematic there. Kansas a problem, and Missouri, 11% poor. Soybeans, not as bad in these areas, but Iowa still 11% poor, and Missouri 10% poor, which is much worse than we usually expect this time of year. So crops overall not in too bad a shape. We don't expect a major yield hit, but there are going to be places that are going to see some stress because of dry conditions. And in some cases, we went from very wet to very dry conditions, causing a problem. And here's a map just showing U.S. corn conditions and how they are doing. Northern areas generally have been showing it better in the way of good to excellent compared to some of the southern areas. Hay areas that are under drought, much less than last year, but we still have large parts of the plains area that are showing some problems that are under drought. And the winter wheat areas, we talked a little bit about some of the winter wheat problems already in eastern Colorado and parts of Kansas. They've been under drought conditions from last year and really have not abated much since that time. Really led to some problems. Heard reports of even concern of accessing enough winter wheat seed being harvested enough out of that. Nolan Duskin, a state climatologist from Colorado, sent a comment indicating that one person was expecting to get about 3 bushels per acre out of his winter wheat, and he normally wouldn't have messed with it, but that would be enough that he could plant that for seed again. So some of the ongoing drought issues we have out there. And this shows up in pasture and range conditions, the similar chart we've been showing before, how much of pasture and range is in very poor to poor, fair condition. Colorado, over half of the rangeland is poor to very poor. Iowa is not a major pasture area, but also some problems there. Kansas, 39% poor to very poor. even Michigan has some areas that are not doing very well. Mainly our western states that are showing the worst condition in the past. I guess just reiterating some of the major issues here: wheat, poor yields, seed issues in Colorado, delayed development on corn, and the rapid transition from very wet to very dry in some of the areas of especially Iowa and maybe parts of Illinois. Beans, cooler and wetter conditions have been a problem, and then the rangeland has been improving somewhat, but still quite poor in the climate. Okay, just a couple other current condition maps. Our soil moisture, what is happening in the way of soil moisture. This is compared to average is in millimeters, so you have to divide by 25 to get inches. That wet area again showing up with several inches above average soil moisture for this time of the year. Dry conditions showing up there in Nebraska, Iowa, parts of southern Minnesota, and then wet again showing up in the Montana and North Dakota area. Much of the eastern part of the Corn Belt, a little wet, a little bit dry, but kind of middle of the road over in that area. So what that wraps up to in the U.S. Drought Monitor for the NOAA Central Region, Great Plains, Corn Belt area, showing that really not major drought conditions over most of the Corn Belt. Pockets showing up now in Missouri and Iowa, a little bit in the northern Corn Belt, with some D0 areas around them. We're watching closely for further degradation. Still areas in Nebraska, western Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, with some significant drought issues still going on. But eastern Kansas being very wet, western Kansas still being quite dry. And then a national picture showing overall east of the Mississippi River generally is drought-free. Our problems are still mainly in the southwest. Okay, let's go on to the outlooks. We'll look at a little bit on El Nino, 7-day precipitation forecast, and then outlooks out to 3 months, and then the drought outlook. First off, we always talk about what's happening with El Nino, La Nina, basically because it gives us a better handle on some longer-term outlooks. Right now, we are in neutral conditions, not El Nino or La Nina, and that still seems to be the indication as we go along. These are outlooks from the International Research Institute of Columbia University, and 3-month periods, August, September, October, September, October, November. And you can see that all the way out into next spring, neutral is the most likely, neutral or non-El Nino, non-La Nina is the most likely outcome. You see better chances for La Nina and less so for El Nino as we go along, but still the most likely outlook going on is neutral conditions. So we have to make our forecast based on that. Okay, starting with the next 7 days, model forecast precipitation over the next 7 days, indicating that, some chances of precipitation over the whole U.S. The biggest area of precipitation, obviously, the far southeast. Some chances of, maybe an inch to an inch and a half of precipitation from western Iowa down through the plains would be beneficial. But a lot of the Corn Belt, a lot of the northern plains, very limited precipitation expected over the next week or so. And that could be problematic because of the drier areas that still do exist. While we've passed the main reproductive stage, we can still stress the crop and lose some yield in some of the very dry areas despite some cooler temperatures. Looking at the week after that, this goes through the end of the month. Temperature on the left-hand side. This is good news from a corn and soybean perspective. Likely warmer than average temperatures are expected from the northern plains through the whole northern part of the region, which for those areas that are behind on degree days, this will help, not solve the issue, but it will help move things along. From a precipitation standpoint, kind of a mixed bag, a little higher chances in the northern plains, North Dakota to Minnesota, near normal, a little bit drier in the central plains, and then a little warmer or better chances for precipitation in the eastern part of the Corn Belt. Certainly somewhat of a mixed bag expected for precipitation. Going on from September, temperature and precipitation outlook, most of the areas in EC equal chances, and that's because of very mixed signals within the dynamic models and some of the tools, really not getting a consistent message in the way of temperatures. So looking like a overall equal chances because we don't have a whole lot of guidance to give. Interestingly, looking at the precipitation standpoint, and we'll see this in the 3-month outlook too, the models were all very consistent in indicating a wetter period coming up for September and continuing on in the 3-month outlook. Let's go ahead and show that. This area of wetter than average showing up in the 3-month outlook, and also an area in Montana. I wonder in between if we might end up filling this in as we go along. Right now it's considered equal chances. The main impact of this is going to be, if this does come to pass, from a crop perspective, we're going to have some late developing crops. People are going to be leaving them in the field to mature and dry as long as they can, and if conditions get wet, that could slow our harvest season down quite a bit. Lesser chances of getting precipitation in the main drought area. Temperature-wise, only the northern part of the region around the Great Lakes has a better chance of being warmer than average. Most of the rest of the region is equal chances for temperature. Okay, we'll go ahead and bypass these and go to the seasonal drought outlook. This is a continuation of the product we've shown before, with the potential for changes in the way of droughts all the way. This was just released today, all the way through the end of November. With that better chance for precipitation, you can see the fringes of the drought area in Iowa has better chances for removal. The plains area has lesser chance or persistence, more likely persistence of drought. There is also a companion product to this that is a monthly drought outlook that is issued at the end of the month, that is available for people on I think I believe on the last day of the month or the first day of the new month. That gives an opportunity at a drought, looking at drought changes for a month period only, not a whole season, but just a month. Those are available at the same place, Climate Prediction Center, for the drought outlook. So I didn't show the other one since we're 2 months through that period already. Okay, kind of summary of where we are right here. Recent conditions, obviously very heavy precipitation, eastern Kansas, parts of Missouri, even a bit east of there, which has led to some very large flooding. The cool summer conditions have eased some of the crop stress, especially in some of the driest areas, but they are delaying development of crops that were already delayed because of late planting, and does have, is a very interesting, is of concerns most of the crop production areas. We still have some very large drought issues in the western plains, Colorado, western Kansas, western Nebraska. Rangeland still in poor condition, winter wheat. The other thing I did not mention about winter wheat was there were comments also from Colorado that people were likely not going to plant winter wheat, but with the recent shot of precipitation they have received, that they would probably go back in and put winter wheat in September unless there were some big changes. So those are some of the ongoing winter wheat problems in the western plains. Where are we looking going ahead? Well, ENSO-neutral conditions are most likely through fall of 2013. So therefore, we kind of throw them out in the way of giving us any guidance. It's very possible we're going to be ENSO-neutral throughout the whole winter. So El Nino, La Nina becomes a non-factor when discussing the winter. Drought conditions will continue in the western area. It's going to be very difficult to remove those as we go into the fall. Not the most likely time, and we're just not to recover from drought conditions, and not seeing a whole lot in the way of precipitation coming in. Northern areas, far northern areas, Montana, and then the eastern Corn Belt are most likely going to be wetter for the fall, according to the Climate Prediction Center outlooks. They talked about this could present some harvest issues for those late developing crops waiting to get them out of the field. For the specific outlooks, the next 2 weeks are going to be warmer. The outlook for September is mixed. This is obviously very important for those delayed crops. The warmer temperatures will be good, but obviously we're still going to be late in developing, and so has people watching the freeze potential. The important thing we're telling people is that they're always concerned about early freeze. We have no indications right now of an early freeze, and we're still too early to be able to give specific indications on that. We will be watching this closely and start issuing notes if this chances become available. But right now, it's too early to say anything about a specific freeze. And I mentioned the winter wheat more likely to go in because of recent rain. Okay, further information, just websites that connect to some of our other partners. A couple of pieces of additional information. We are also working on quarterly 2-page reports of impacts and brief outlooks. the new one will be coming out in the middle of September for the summer quarterly one, looking at the fall. We're also working on a 2012 drought assessment document. We're still in process and don't have a specific time frame on that. And there's one more that I can't remember off the top of my head that I'll try to remember as we go along. So thank you to all those who contributed to this, contributed pieces and information. Should include Brad Rippey from USDA again, who will be on next month. And now we will open it up for any questions or additional comments anyone has.
Certainly. At this time, I'd like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, if you would like to ask a question, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from the line of Laura Edwards. Your line is open.
Hi, Dennis. It's Laura. Have you heard anything about hydrology or river forecasts or management changes as far as releases go, either in for flood control or water supply or navigation, any of those things, either on the Missouri or Mississippi River basins?
Are the Corps guys available and they want to make any comment on that?
Well, we are lucky today that we do have the Corps on the phone with us. So, but just the Omaha district. So.
Hi, Laura. This is Kevin Grody from the Corps of Engineers, Missouri River Based Water Management. I'm a little confused on what exactly you're asking.
Oh, I'm just wondering, in response to the cooler, well, in your basin, I guess it's been cooler and a little drier, at least on the northern side. If you've changed releases or anything in preparation for the fall season yet, or in response to summer season?
As far as the Missouri River main stem releases are going, we are midway between, based on our July 1 storage check for the rest of the navigation season, which ends December 1st at the mouth. We're at kind of a midway there, somewhere between minimum service and full service. So we will be providing that navigation flow support for a full season. That being said, our recent projections indicate that we will also be on minimum winter releases during the winter months. And then our long-term forecasts indicate, with the drought continuing and recovery from the drought, that will likely begin the 2014 navigation season somewhere close to minimum navigation service.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
There are no further questions at this time from the phone. I turn the call back over to the presenters.
Before we get rid of the questions, Dennis, have you looked ahead at some of the other outlooks for precipitation and temperature beyond September, October, and November, and into the winter season? Because obviously we all know that the Climate Prediction Center actually goes out a full year. But it's about this time or maybe a little later where we start seeing some indication of the pattern that may be setting up. And I know it's going to be weak sort of probabilities this time of year due to the non-ENSO influence. But can we either bring it up on your screen and maybe show a couple of those if you're ready or not?
Okay, are you seeing the browser on my window now?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the 2.5-month lead, November, December, January outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. The Climate Prediction Center has maintained that wet area up over Montana through the fall and into early part of winter here. I think it's more of a fall precipitation than a winter precipitation, but they do have this pocket of above average probabilities of precipitation in that area. So that would provide some benefit for into stream flows. At this point, there are not anything in the way of, looking at the like here's December, January, February, no indications on precipitation at all. And and that continues on. And that is largely due to the lack of an El Nino, La Nina signal of anything showing up. They don't have anything to hang their hat on in that upper basin area because of precipitation. And I think the fall one is more of the dynamic models. Some of the computer models they run are showing up with some of that wet area. It also is interesting to see that wet area in the eastern southern part of the Corn Belt stays consistent through the fall and into early winter. So that bears watching, not from necessarily, well, it could potentially be a flood standpoint depending on how heavy the rains are, but in the areas that are wetter, if they continue to be wetter. From a temperature standpoint, the only thing that is going on through the winter, here's December, January, February temperature outlook, likely above average temperatures. I think this is more of a trend-driven issue where we don't have much else to use as background. So the trend is, which is towards warmer winters, is driving above average chances for warmer than average. And that is pretty much consistent through the late fall and into early spring.
Thank you, Dennis. The other comment I'll make really quickly is that, as Dennis has said, Brad Rippey from USDA is going to be on to talk about a little bit about how the climate has impacted various crops across this region as well as the nation. So that should be pretty interesting. And we'll highlight that on the invitations when we send it out next month. I guess that's the last, well, the other last comment I'll make is that Dennis also mentioned the 2012 drought assessment. We're hoping to have that done this year, and it will be sent broadly and made public on a list, probably pretty close to where you sign up for these webinars. So look for that in the next few months. I don't know if Jim Angel wants to comment on that, but since he's sort of heading that up. But anyway, that's my final comment.